Good evening, Gary.
Good evening, Ian.
Yes, and we've got a very interesting show lined up tonight.
We have, yeah. I'm really looking forward to this one. You've got a guest on you've had on before, haven't you?
Yeah, Peter Ski Schwartz, he of the Ski Jam fame on the Wavestate and many of the presets on the Modwave, Multipoly, and other Korg synths. He's going to be joining us, doing us a masterclass in sound design, on particular modulation. So I think everyone is going to really enjoy this.
It's brilliant stuff.
Just before we get into this video, I just wanted to say Tim actually sort of reduced the audio quality down of Peter's Modwave and made it into mono, but you can still get what he's talking about, the principles and everything else. I think you'll enjoy this.
Peter, welcome back to the show.
Thank you. It's good to be back. We've been talking about doing this for a long time over message.
Yeah, it's great to get you on the show because people know you as Ski, as in Ski Jam, and many other Korg sounds on various synths. In my Multipoly is here, and many of the presets you did those as well, and they sound absolutely amazing. So,
thanks.
It's great to get you back on the show. And what we wanted to do today is get a bit of a masterclass from the expert, particularly in modulation. And I'm glad you've picked a good synth there, the Modwave, to talk about modulation. So before we start there, so what is modulation?
Okay, on the most basic level, to modulate means to change. And it's really about that simple. But when we're talking about synth modulation, there are different things that we can change. So let's start with the basic properties of sound, of which there are only 4, and some would argue there are only 3, but I won't get into that. The properties of sound are pitch, timbre, duration, and loudness. And that's it. Pitch, timbre, duration, and loudness. So pitch is one of the easiest things to talk about, because when we hear, oh, that's great, the first note I played is a clam. Let's try that again. So we hear pitch, in this case is a static pitch, and if I was to move this tuning knob, we hear the pitch change. It's a very obvious change in that property of the sound. So if we want, what would happen if we modulate pitch? Well, obviously I just did that by turning a knob, but what if we sort of automate it using another synth module that creates a rising and falling shape? Well, we would expect to hear the pitch go up and down and up and down, maybe in that pattern or some other pattern. So I'll just do it real quick. I'm going to take an LFO, which is a repeating wave shape, and I'm going to modulate pitch with it. Let's take LFO1.
And think about the Multipoly and the Modwave, and they've got multiple LFOs, haven't you, to play with?
Right. So I'm just to sort of keep things. I mean, all the LFOs are the same. So, but I'm just sticking with like oscillator 1 LFO to modulate or change pitch. And let's look at the LFO itself and the shape. The shape tells you what it's going to do to pitch. Like, you can predict the sound without even hearing it just by looking at the shape. You have this baseline white line that represents no change, and then the shape over time ramps up, so it's going to drive the pitch above its baseline of 0, and then it's going to drive it down below, and then it's going to repeat. This is the triangle wave shape. So this sort of simulates what I vocalized a minute ago. It's going to make the pitch go up and go down. So that is pitch modulation. And, it doesn't have to be a triangle shape doing that. It could be a square shape. And again, just by looking at the graphic, you can tell what it's going to do to pitch. Let's look at another one. Saw up. So at the start of the waveform, it's going to drive the pitch down, and then it's going to go up above 0, and then it's going to loop. So I imagine that this is going to make the sound go, and sure enough, just by interpreting the shape, you can tell how it's going to modulate or change pitch. So that's pitch modulation. And then, so let's get rid of this, and let's go to timbre, which is tone color, for lack of a better term. Now, on the Modwave, you can change tone color in a bunch of different ways. You can change the waveform by manually scanning through this wavetable. You can also change the timbre by adjusting the cutoff frequency of the filter. So right now I am manually modulating the cutoff, or I can put this under control of an aspect of the synth that will cause cutoff to raise and lower periodically, like I did with pitch. I could do the same thing by applying an LFO to the wavetable position. And so I'm using one synth parameter. In this case, I can use an LFO. In fact, well, let's just do it. Let me add this here. I'll just use same LFO. Why not? So I'm changing the waveform with this shape that's modulating the wave position. So when it comes to modulation, you think about what aspect of the sound you want to change and what you want to change it with. Like, what kind of shape do you want to change that aspect of the sound with? That's what those are the fundamentals of modulation. So you can modulate pitch, you can modulate timbre, you can modulate loudness, which is just volume, and you can modulate time. You can make sounds longer or shorter. You can influence the duration of sounds with LFOs, with the mod wheel, with all these other different control sources. So modulation always involves a source of control. What are you going to control a parameter of the sound with? And what is that destination parameter? So again, you've got pitch, timbre, loudness, and duration. And to control duration, I'm talking about like controlling envelope times. You can make a tack longer, you can make decay shorter by influencing them with some sort of control source. It could be an LFO, it could be the mod wheel, it could be the MIDI note where you play on the keyboard. So it's all about controlling it, one aspect of one property of sound with a synthesizer source of change. That's the basics of modulation. And there are other things you can do with modulation that go beyond actually manipulating sound parameters. And that's the purview of the mod processors, which is
right.
Which is what I can get into, what I'd like to get into in depth. But is there anything that you want me to clarify about modulation, or maybe demonstrate some other things?
No. Other when you're sort of creating your typical patch, and what are the kind of things you do, sort of modulation to sort of make sort of richness of sounds, and your typical sort of things that you would do. What modulations would you apply?
Okay, well, one of the first things I might do. Oh, actually, let me do this. I'm putting up a second oscillator. We were only hearing one oscillator before, so now I've got two oscillators going, and you can already hear that the sound has some animation to it as opposed to just the one oscillator, right? So I'm not actually, this is not a modulation. This is just because one oscillator is detuned a little bit from the other. So oscillator one is 0 detuning, and oscillator 2 is detuned against it. That's not a modulation because the pitch of the oscillator I'm detuning is not being actively detuned. It's just a static setting. So I would not consider that a modulation. The detuning is just the natural result of having two sound sources playing at the same time, two oscillators, and one of them is slightly detuned from the other. You would get the same exact thing if you had two people singing the same note, and one of them was just slightly out of tune with the other. In fact, that's why this effect is called chorusing, because no two human beings can sing the same exact note perfectly in pitch for any duration of time. And when you get a whole bunch of people together, or if you got a whole lot of oscillators together and you detune them, you get this effect called chorusing. But it's not an active. If nobody's adding vibrato to their voice, they're all just singing straight tones, then you would get this natural chorusing effect. But one of the things I would do to enhance this is I would modulate the pitch of one oscillator with basically the equivalent of vibrato. So what I'm going to do, here we go. I'm going to modulate the tuning of one oscillator with an LFO, a repeating wave shape. Let's use this one. I'm going to preemptively jam the frequency up here a little bit. And now let's listen to what happens as so the LFO is the modulation source, and the destination is oscillator 1 tuning. The signal flow is source to destination. And now I'm going to turn up the amount, which I'm doing over here. Yes. And so now I've got the natural detuning between the two oscillators, plus I'm adding the equivalent of a slow vibrato. We can just listen to that on its own. All right, so it sounds a little sickly on its own, but when that's mixed in with another oscillator that's detuned, it's a richer kind of chorusing effect than if I'm not modulating it.
It sounds Gary Newman-like already.
Sounds very
Gary Newman.
Yeah. And then, to make the sound more interesting, and it gets that kind of thing can sound very growly and thick. So that's a really basic modulation approach to make two chorusing oscillators sound even more chorused by adding this tiny amount of fairly slow vibrato to one. So that's the thing I would do routinely. On the Modwave in particular, let me zero this. On the Modwave in particular, there's a tendency to take to do that kind of thing, to scan or sweep through the wavetable periodically with an LFO. So let's see what happens if I come here. Do the same thing, LFO. So I demonstrated this somewhat quickly earlier, the idea of modulating the timbre with an LFO, in this case, scanning through the wavetable as a way to change the timbre, as opposed to modulating the main traditional timbre control on a synth, which is the filter's cutoff. So on the Modwave in particular, this is like a boilerplate kind of modulation. And in fact, where was it? There's a sound I made called it's been a while. Where is it? By the way, I'm actually not used to this interface. I'm used to a different interface. Oh yeah, use your words. That's it. Use your words. So this is. So all the changes that you hear in the sound, it's because something is being modulated. Wave shape is being modulated. Where's the edit button? There it is. So, you know, this is a real world example of the waveform being modulated as part of the nature of this sound. If we click on this, we can see that I'm using LFO, oscillator 2 LFO. And there's probably something going on here. Yep, sure enough. The reason that's moving is because the wave position is being modulated. And if we were to take all this modulation off, it would the sound wouldn't animate. It would just be a static sound. So modulation is really the key to giving sounds some sort of interest over time. Or on a very basic level, just adding vibrato, you know, the traditional turn up the mod wheel and hear vibrato effect. That's also modulation, pitch modulation.
There's something about sort of the non-static sounds that our ears like, isn't there? So if you listen to a static sawtooth waves from a digital oscillator, your ear gets tired of it very quickly. But if you listen to one from an analog synth that's a bit of phasing or something like that, or through the mod wave where you've got a bit of movement, it just makes it more interesting.
Yeah, and so there was a time when having a single oscillator synth sound was thought to be just sort of cheap and crappy in terms of the level of synthesis technique, but then that changed, and single oscillator sounds became very popular. Part of the new wave sound was just having a single oscillator instead of having a mini Moog sound with 3 oscillators all detuned and trying to sound gargantuan and fat. So there have been stylistic trends over the years where one oscillator just didn't cut it, and then when it was like the latest thing. But for sounds where you're gonna sustain, this just it just doesn't go anywhere. It's sort of organy. Modulation allows you to change all kinds of parameters to lend character to sounds over time and make them more interesting sounding than just your straight up oscillator. So yeah. Let me see here. So here's a thing about modulation that doesn't directly influence one of the 4 properties of sound. It's more of a utility thing. So check this out. This sound on its own is nothing special. But if I play with high velocity, so low velocity, high velocity. And I'll show you how I'm doing that in a second. What it allows me to do if I play soft, I'm not playing very well today, but the idea is that you can have a sound that has two characters. The low velocity sound, the high velocity character. So I've now got two different characters in the same sound without having to create splits. I created a more refined version of this. So soft velocity, high velocity.
That sounds good.
Thanks. So sometimes these demo sounds turn into actual factory patches. This one might one day. So I want to show you how I'm getting velocity to do that. And this all has to do with something called a mod processor, let's try that again. Mod processor set to gate mode. And gate means that you're going to get two different outputs from this processing module, depending on a certain condition. If condition A is met, you're going to get one output. If condition B is met, you're going to get a different output. And in this case, you can see here that I've got a control source velocity, and there's a threshold control. And above that threshold, and I just dialed in a value here that worked for my playing. It's not like there's any scientific method to determining this value. Above that threshold, this mod processor module is going to output step sequencer A, which is, let's look at step sequencer A. So it's doing this this little thing here. Let me change the zoom. Oh, it's as low as it goes. Okay. So it's doing a step that's like below 0, then 0, then a little above 0, and then it's 0 again, and that loops. So if I play hard, if I play above this threshold, this module is going to output step sequencer A. It's going to allow step sequencer A to get to its output. And if I play below the threshold, it says right here, below threshold, it's going to output a fixed value, which is 0. So basically, it's going to output nothing if I play soft, and it's going to output step sequencer A if I play hard. And so that's the function of the mod processor. This isn't saying where the output is going to go. It's just it's setting up the game. So here we go. Synthesis. Let's see where it sounds to me like, yeah, okay. I'm saying it sounds to me like it's modulating cutoff. Yes, I made the sound. Yes, I should know the secrets, but it changed. It changed from what I intended to actually. Never mind. You can even see just from the graphics on the screen. This is something that we didn't have growing up, 40 years ago on synthesizers. You just had to visualize in your head or hear what was modulating what. If you made a sound on Monday and you came back to it Tuesday after a night of partying, and it's like, oh, how is that sound doing that again? We didn't have these graphics. So this is a marvelous thing. And we can see right here, there it is, mod processor 1, which is this gate module, is being modulated by that amount. Again, not scientifically chosen, just dialed in by feel. Oh, wait a second. Wait, got to turn this off. Yeah, there we go. I'll tell you what that's doing in a second. So yeah. So if I zero this, right? And I'm playing hard right now. We're not getting any modulation from the mod processor, but I can apply this to pitch. Where is that? Here. It's already conveniently set up. Mod processor 1 is going to modulate tuning. Let's make this 100. So now instead of getting a modulation of timbre, I'm getting a little melodic pattern on the oscillator. So again, the chain of events is the mod processor is allowing velocity to determine whether step sequencer A's signal gets out of it, or below the threshold, nothing's getting out of it. We have a fixed value. We don't have a source of modulation selected. It's a fixed value of 0. And so this is just one of the kind of neat tricks that you can do with the gate mod processor, is set up a set of conditions where below a certain threshold, one thing happens. In this case, nothing, right? Below threshold, nothing happens. Or above a certain threshold, it allows a modulation source to pass to its output, and then you can use the mod processor as the modulation source to modulate different things. If I wanted to, and I will, I will modulate both pitch, as it's doing now, and the filter. And let's here.
So I suppose you could do this so that if you play a note below middle C, you can have wavetable at position at the bottom, and if you play it above, you can go to the wavetable above as a fixed value, or you can have it as a sliding scale. It gives you loads of different options.
Exactly. Let's just do that. Let's see here. Now let's start with an init. Let's do exactly that. So I'm just going to throw some chorusing on this, so it sounds a little interesting while we're doing this. Okay, so the thinking is the keyboard is going to be, or MIDI note number is going to be the determining factor. So we want the control source to be, where is it? Note number, there it is. And just to test this out on a very basic level, we're going to say below the threshold, nothing's going to happen. And above the threshold, I'm just going to send out a fixed value of a lot, right? And now we're going to modulate wave position. Just as a test, we're going to modulate wave position with that mod processor. And let's just see which MIDI note actually crosses the threshold. So are we hearing this one? Hold on. Okay, there we go. We were hearing both oscillators at the same time, so that didn't help. All right, so
you get a sine wave, and then you get the triangle.
So I'm playing B below middle C right now. Apparently that's below the threshold. And middle C, I'm now playing middle C, and that's causing the modulation. Let's go back here. So now we know where our threshold responds to. At a threshold of 0, it looks at middle C as the tipping point, not B, which I'm playing now, but middle C. And this, let's not. Right. That's a little more of an interesting sound. All I did was I reduced the amount that the mod processor was changing the wave position. Now let's say we want to have this occur on a higher note. Let's say C above middle C. So now what I've got to do is I've got to change the threshold. I've got to find the threshold where it's coming. Okay, so around 18, 19 is where the threshold needs to be set so that the C above middle C is where the change of timbre occurs. And this is a way of creating a keyboard split. So below, I'm playing below middle C right now, we're hearing the sawtooth wave, and above, was it C4? We're hearing the square wave, or the square-ish wave.
Yeah.
So that's, and so I'm not going to change my, I don't need to tweak my above, I don't need to change these settings. I've got the value of what's going to happen when the threshold is crossed at 100. That's good enough. It doesn't need to be some sort of tweezy value. It can just be the maximum. And below the threshold is 0. And then it just becomes a matter of, in terms of the change in sound, you set the intensity of the wave position modulation to acquire the timbre you want to hear above the threshold. And so again, it's not that the keyboard or MIDI note number itself is modulating the wave position. You're using the keyboard as a determining factor as to which key is going to cause this mod processor to basically go high, 100, and that value of 100 is going to be mitigated by the intensity control on wave position, which is where you can. So yeah, that's a perfect example. And there are many sounds where you can create a completely different sound on one half of the keyboard than compared to the other by using just this one mod processor, because this isn't dedicated now to controlling wave position. You could apply it to, at the same time, to anything else you want. So it's sort of unlimited how many places you can route this mod processor's output to, and you can create split keyboards that way. So that was a good one.
Yeah, that's nice. And I suppose something like on the multi-poly, you can switch between filters as well, so you can almost create like two entirely separate sounds from one layer on multi-poly using that kind of thing.
Yeah. Almost anything that you can think that's modulatable that you can think of changing, you can affect that change with the mod processor. And I think the multi-poly has the most the greatest number of mod processors built into a Korg synthesizer to date. So it's a from a programming perspective, it's very, very flexible. Mm. Now there are other modes of the mod processor. The gate is very utilitarian. There are some others. I happen to like using the smooth function when I'm applying aftertouch to control vibrato. So let's see here. Let's do poly AT. So let me show. I'll demonstrate the effect of smooth. Let's let me just take this off. All right. So let's modulate. Actually, let's do this. Generator, no, controller, poly AT. Let me make sure. Yeah, my controller's set to poly AT. All right, so I'm just using aftertouch. He can't see me like putting pressure on the keyboard, but that's what I'm doing. I'm putting pressure on the key. And that's causing a change in pitch. So this is poly aftertouch modulating pitch. The response is, it's a little too immediate for me. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to process poly aftertouch through this smoothing mod processor set to smoothing. Mod processor set to smoothing. I'll practice that. We can do take two some other time. So now instead of modulating pitch directly with poly aftertouch, I'm going to modulate pitch with the mod processor. And the attack and decay on here determine how lazy the mod processor is going to be at allowing this poly aftertouch signal to develop and then and fade out. Okay, now that last sound that I just played, it had the smoothest release of all the notes I've played so far. It's also got the smoothest rise. That might be a little too much.
Again, it's sounding very Gary Newman.
I must be channeling him today.
Yeah.
So the smoothing takes the values of poly aftertouch coming in, and it takes its time allowing them to go through. That's the attack. And it takes its time allowing lower value as the value of poly aftertouch decreases. It kind of takes its time allowing that stuff to get through, and that's the function of the smooth parameter.
That's a great tip.
This is kind of cool for instead of poly aftertouch, let's do mod wheel. So what I'm doing is jamming the mod wheel all the way up. And it creates a portamento effect, as opposed because the output of the mod wheel is being smoothed, as opposed to doing it directly. So now it's just mod wheel to pitch, right? Jamming it up. Or processing, I just hit undo, processing the mod wheel through this smoothing, or it's sort of like a lag generator. This would be called a lag generator in modular synthesis terms. Again, I'm going to jam it up. So that's another use. It's also kind of useful. Let's get rid of this. I'm going to modulate cutoff with this smoothed mod wheel. Let's see. Again, I'm going to jam it up and jam it down. Jam up, jam down. So it makes the mod wheel lazy, but it kind of lets you do very smooth filter sweeps with the mod wheel, where you don't have to be so careful about like moving into exact positions. It just it actually adds some life. It makes the mod wheel feel more organic when it's being processed through this smoothing processor.
Yeah, that's a great tip.
Yeah, I like that one. The others, I would say that the most complex use of a mod processor is to add two sources of modulation together. So for example, and the graphics really show you here, if you want to control, let's say, pitch with the mod wheel and something else, you can combine those mod sources in this mod processor in some mode. Not in some mode, but some mode, and then apply the output of the mod processor to pitch or whatever. And so basically it lets you combine two modulation sources. It's kind of no different from saying, okay, I'm just going to directly modulate, I don't know, in this case, tuning with, let's say, the mod knob and mod wheel at once. You can do it just like I did here from the modulation pane, or if you want to consolidate this modulation into a single modulation source, you can use the summing version.
I suppose you could use it for something like maybe if you're doing filter sweep but with LFO at the same time. So instead of just a straight filter sweep, it was a sort of a sine waved filter sweep or something like that. You can combine two things.
Let's do that. Okay, so let's see here. Control it. No. Here we go. Let's use the filter LFO. Just doesn't really matter, but I could have used a pitch LFO, and let's use mod wheel and apply that to cutoff. So again, I've combined them here, and I'm going to modulate the filter with just this one module, mod processor one. Okay, again, you can't see what I'm doing, so I'll explain it. Mod wheel is down, and we're getting the expected result from having the LFO modulate cutoff. Let's do a random. Let's do this. Okay, and then if I push the mod wheel up like this, the reason the sound is burbling at a higher cutoff point is because the mod wheel is pushing cutoff higher than it would normally be if just the LFO was allowed to modulate cutoff. So this is with mod wheel down. And now I'm going to push mod wheel up.
Yeah, so you're bringing the level up with the LFO still combined with that, yeah.
Yeah, it creates an offset, basically. So the mod wheel becomes the offset. The LFO is continuing to do its thing, but you've consolidated both modulation sources in this sum mode mod processor, and you're modulating the filter just from that one source instead of having two separate items listed in the mod list.
Yeah, that's a nice effect as well. I can imagine a lot of things you could use that.
You can combine two LFOs this way. You can combine two envelopes this way. Really, anything that shows up on these lists, Chaos X Plus and whatever, Oscillator 1 LFO, whatever you want to combine, you do it here, and then you apply this combined modulation to the sound parameter you want to modulate. So yeah, this is a good one.
Yeah, that's really nice, that one.
I thought maybe I would show just where is that? Here's an example of a mod processor that is affecting one of the factory sounds I made called Magic Pad. So it's not so obvious, but I wanted to point it out because the functions of the knobs aren't like documented anywhere. You just sort of have to figure it out on your own. But So I just turned off layer B, so the sound is less complex. And pad texture. So here. So you can see there's a threshold on this pad texture knob. So it's an instantaneous change. This knob is acting like a switch. And you can see here that just from the graphics, without having to do an autopsy on the sound, you can see that the pad texture knob is changing the octave setting on oscillator 1. And the reason I called it pad texture is because when both layers are on and you turn this all the way to the right, it has the effect of changing the texture, the sonic effect of changing the texture of the sound, as opposed to just switching the octave of one component. And I felt it was better to give it a descriptive name rather than a technical name. So let's just look at how, yeah, there it is, Mod Processor 2. So let's look at Mod Processor 2. It's set to gate mode. The control source is Mod Knob 4. So this is great. This is all making sense. Look at the threshold. It's set way up there, 95. So and then and the value. So above 95, it's putting out this high value of 100. It's just a steady state value of 100 or maximum. And below the threshold, it's doing nothing. It's outputting nothing. So this is another function of the gate processor, is that you can turn a knob into a switch. Let's bring this threshold down a little bit.
Yeah, you can hear it there.
So now the action occurs in a different range in the switch.
Yeah, that's a nice use of it as well.
Yeah, it's useful for turning things hard on and off.
Yeah.
As opposed to a parameter like the edge parameter, which lets you dial in a certain amount of a control. This is just a switch. And there really aren't any assignable switches. Well, it's not that there really aren't any. There aren't any assignable switches on the Modwave. So why not turn a knob into a switch?
Yeah.
You can also do the same kind of thing. For instance, you can say, okay, once the chaos X plus crosses a certain threshold, output a high value and create switch effects from the chaos vectors. So that's
these are really handy techniques, and it's great to get the insights from someone that's creating the factory presets. And my recommendation to anybody when they get one of these synths is to go to the factory presets and start looking at them in the editor. And that's what's so good about having a visual editor, and see how the professionals have done them like you, and that gives you can learn so much from just dissecting those, using that display and really dissecting the sounds that you've already created.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. We call that autopsying a sound. So for this sound, for example, let's just do it. I'm going to turn off layer B because it's very hard to investigate what a 2-layer sound is doing. If you're really not sure what's going on, just keep things simple. Turn off layer B. Let's go to layer A. Okay, there's kind of a lot going on there. So let's look at the graphics. So you can see that this little guy bounces up and down And that's creating the random pinging bell sound. So, all right, what's causing that to happen? Oscillator 2 envelope is the modulation source. So in this case, we're modulating volume, the volume of oscillator 2 in the mixer. Okay, so what's causing the envelope to fire? Because what I'm doing right now is I'm just holding down a key. And it's randomly firing. Okay, so let's look at oscillator 2 envelope, which is over here. Okay, well, attack, decay, sustain, release, whatever. This is the thing you want to look at. Filter LFO. The filter LFO is causing this envelope to fire. So what does that mean? Okay, well, let's look at the filter envelope, the filter LFO. Well, wouldn't you know it, it's set to random. So that as it changes level over time, it's going to cross, and you can see that the level of the random LFO wave shape will be at 0 sometimes, above 0, and below 0. So let's go back to that. Oops. Here, this guy. So filter LFO, threshold of -2. I couldn't tell you why I settled on that. There's probably a technical reason for that. I think 0 would be fine. But when the LFO value exceeds this threshold, it's going to cause the envelope to fire. Now look at the shape of the envelope. It's a sharp attack and a slowish decay, sort of bell-like. When you ring a bell, it goes ping. And if you think about that sound, it's got a sharp attack and decays over time. Sharp attack, decays slowly over time. So this is the shape responsible for controlling the volume level of this filter mixer slider. So again, if we work backwards, oscillator 2 envelope is modulating the volume of that of that oscillator in the mixer. The envelope itself is being triggered by a filter LFO that is set to random. And so that's the chain of events backwards. So if we get rid of that, let's get rid of that modulation. I just minused it. It's gone. All right. What else is going on? I can see here on the graphics that wave position is being modulated and so you click on it, you look here, and oscillator 2 LFO is modulating that. So let's just prove that by changing the frequency.
Yeah.
Sure. Okay. So we know what's causing that aspect. I'm going to get rid of that. There's something else going on. Oscillator 1 envelope is also modulating position. Get rid of that. Oh, you know what? I'm sorry. That was my mistake. I wasn't looking at that. Here. There.
Yeah, it's gone static now.
It's gone static. So if you hit undo, and redo, there's a difference.
Yeah.
So all right, so now the sound is getting very boring, but that's okay. There's some sort of panning going on here. Again, the filter LFO is modulating panning as well as triggering that envelope. So get rid of that. And this is how you would go basically step backwards through the sound until you get to the bare bones. And then you can undo your changes and step forward through the through the way that the sound, back into the way the sound was programmed. Of course, you can't hurt anything by deleting modulations unless you save the patch again. Yeah. So, just and there were really no secrets. There's nothing behind the scenes here that is responsible for creating any of these sounds. You can investigate the programming to its full extent just by taking things one step at a time and taking them apart and seeing what's modulating what.
Yeah, I think that's definitely the number one tip. I think if anyone takes from today's session is to have a look and have a go. I mean, like I said, it's absolutely brilliant to hear this from the creator of some of these factory patches back to Wavestation and all the way through. If anybody's not heard that interview that we did, I'd recommend checking that out as well, because we went through your backstory and some of the great synths that you've worked on as well. That was great. Well, I think this has been absolutely brilliant. We could go on much longer, so I think what we'll have to do is split this into another show. We'll have to get back on to do this again, because there's way more that I wanted to ask you, and there's way more we could talk about. But I've really enjoyed doing that. I think it's been a real masterclass in sound design. So really do appreciate you doing that today.
Sure, no, it's my pleasure. I think what would be really effective is if you set me up, like here, like, oh well, you could do this to do this, and then I'll do it for you, like something. Yeah, I'll come up with some things to try and challenge you, and then you can do them. Embarrass me on worldwide TV. No, that would be fun. Yeah, we'll do that. So we'll definitely get you back on the show. Really appreciate you joining us tonight and taking time out to do that. Really enjoyed that. I'm glad. Thanks again for having me. I love talking about this stuff and happy to do it again. Yeah, right. Well, we'll set that up. Okay. Great. Thanks, Peter. That was brilliant. Thank you. Take care. All right. I'll get in touch.
That was great. Really enjoyed that. I don't think the reduced audio quality on the Modwave affected too much, but we're definitely going to do something like that again. Hopefully get nice stereo as well. So thanks to Peter, thanks to Gary. We'll be back same time, same place next week with another interesting guest. Please subscribe and all that, and I'll see you next week.